Little girl found a Hell's Angel in the dumpster. What happened next shocked everyone. The summer sun pressed down on the cracked asphalt like a warm hand against skin, baking the parking lot behind the Ridgewood Garden apartments until the air itself shimmered and bent. Shadows stretched long and thin from the dumpsters lining the brick wall, and somewhere beyond the fence, a dog barked twice and fell silent. Lily Whitfield was 5 years old and she believed in everything. She believed that butterflies carried wishes on their wings. She believed that if you whispered to the clouds, they would change shape just for you. She believed that the cracks in the sidewalk were really maps to buried treasure, and she believed with the absolute certainty that only a 5-year-old can possess that today was going to be an adventure. Her pink sneakers scuffed the pavement as she skipped along the walkway behind the apartment building, her pigtails bouncing with every step secured by her favorite rainbow hair ties that caught the afternoon light and threw tiny prisms across her shirt. She hummed a song from Kindergarten 1 about a caterpillar who became something beautiful, and her small voice echoed off the brick walls around her. Inside the apartment, her mother Claire was on the phone again. Lily had pressed her ear to the kitchen door and heard the sharp, clipped tone that meant business, the voice her mother used when she was talking to people who wore suits and carried briefcases. Her stepfather Preston had not come home yet. He rarely did before the streetlights came on. Nobody had noticed Lily slip through the front door and down the stairs. Nobody noticed most days. A butterfly appeared at the edge of the parking lot, its wings tipped with orange like someone had dipped them in sunset paint. It hovered just above Lily's outstretched fingers, teasing, dancing in the still air, then darted away toward the dumpsters. Lily followed. The air changed back here. It smelled like old food and rust, like the inside of a metal box left too long in the sun. But Lily did not mind. She was tracking the butterfly, and nothing else mattered. The orange-winged creature fluttered higher, rising above the nearest dumpster and disappearing over its green metal lip. Lily stood on her tiptoes, too short. She pressed her palms flat against the warm metal and pushed herself up, but her arms trembled and her sneakers slipped. She looked around. Wooden pallets leaned against the wall nearby, stacked at odd angles. With the determination of someone who had been solving problems her entire 5 years of life, Lily grabbed the lightest one and dragged it across the pavement. The wood scraped and groaned against the asphalt. She positioned it against the dumpster, tested it with one foot, then climbed. Her fingers curled over the metal edge. She pulled herself up just enough to see inside. The butterfly was gone, but something else was there. A man lay curled among the garbage bags and flattened cardboard boxes, his body folded into itself like he was trying to become as small as possible. He was large, with broad shoulders and thick arms covered in tattoos that spiraled from his wrists to his biceps, disappearing beneath a torn leather vest. His beard was thick and tangled, streaked with gray at the edges. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, and his breathing came in shallow, uneven pulls that made his chest rise and fall like a broken bellows. There was something dark and wet on his left side, soaking through his t-shirt and pooling beneath him. Lily knew what blood looked like. She had scraped her knees enough times to recognize the bright red stain of a fresh wound and the darker, thicker look of blood that had been sitting for a while. This was the dark kind, a lot of it. Her stomach tightened, her hands gripped the metal edge harder. "Mister," she said. Her voice was small, barely more than a breath. "Are you sleeping?" He did not move, did not twitch, did not make a sound except for those thin, ragged breaths. Lily felt her lower lip begin to tremble. Tears gathered in her eyes, blurring the man's still form into a smear of leather and ink and red. She wanted to run. She wanted to find her mother, but her teacher, Mrs. Garland, always said that nobody should be alone when they are hurt. That was the rule. And Lily followed the rules, even the ones that scared her. "Help!" she cried, her voice cracking as it bounced off the brick walls. "Somebody please help! There's a hurt man here!" She cried until her throat ached, until the tears ran down her cheeks and dripped from her chin onto the wooden pallet beneath her. She cried and she did not leave. She would not leave him alone. The sound of footsteps came from around the corner. Dorothy Blaine had been walking home from the Hargrove mansion where she had spent the morning scrubbing kitchen floors and polishing silverware until her knuckles ached. She was 68 years old with silver hair pinned neatly beneath a blue kerchief and hands that had known more work than rest in their 6 decades of service. She wore a gray dress pressed crisp that morning and sensible shoes that had carried her through 3 different employers and 20 years of aching knees. She heard the child's cries first. Then she saw her. A little girl perched on a wooden pallet, like a bird on a wire, tears streaming down her face, her tiny hands gripping the edge of a dumpster as though the world depended on her holding on. Dorothy's instinct was to grab the child and run. Every lesson life had taught her said to walk away from trouble, especially trouble that came wrapped in leather and tattoos. But then the girl turned and looked at her with those wide eyes, and something deep in Dorothy's chest gave way. "Please, Miss Dorothy," Lily said. She knew Dorothy from the neighborhood. She had seen her sweeping the front steps of the big white house at the end of the street. "He's hurt real bad. We have to help him." Dorothy set down her purse. She approached the dumpster slowly, her worn shoes crunching on the gravel. She peered over the edge and saw the man, the blood, the shallow breathing. Her jaw tightened. "Stand back, sweetheart," she said, and her voice carried the kind of authority that comes from a lifetime of doing what needs doing. She checked his pulse. Faint but present, a thread of life still holding. His skin was cool despite the heat, and up close she could see that the wound on his side had been made by something sharp, a knife maybe, or a piece of metal. It had clotted some, but the blood loss was significant. "He's alive," Dorothy said, "but we need to get him out of here." It took both of them, the old woman and the small girl, working together with a kind of desperate coordination that defied logic. Dorothy talked to the man, patting his face firmly, calling him back from whatever dark place he had drifted to. His eyes fluttered. A groan escaped his cracked lips. Slowly, painfully, he shifted his weight toward the edge of the dumpster, his boots finding the pallet, his body leaning heavily against Dorothy's sturdy frame. He was enormous up close. Well over 6 feet, with arms like knotted rope and a chest broad enough to block the sun. Silver dog tags hung from a chain around his neck, glinting dully in the light. His leather vest bore patches she could not read, faded symbols of a life lived on the edges. Lily grabbed Dorothy's purse and clutched it to her chest like a shield, walking beside them as Dorothy half carried, half dragged the man toward her car. His feet scraped the pavement with each step, and his breathing came in harsh, wet gasps that made Lily's eyes water all over again. Then Lily said something that nearly brought Dorothy to her knees. "It's okay, Daddy," the girl said, clear as a bell, reaching up to pat the man's blood-crusted hand. "Mommy said you're my daddy. She has a picture of you in her special box." Dorothy looked down at the child, then up at the man's battered face. His eyes were barely open, unfocused, seeing nothing, but his fingers twitched at Lily's touch. Dorothy did not ask questions. There would be time for that later. She opened the back door of her old blue station wagon, the paint peeling and the seats worn to threads, and together they eased the man inside. Lily climbed in next to him without being told, settling close to his side, her small hand resting on his arm. "You're going to be okay, Daddy," she whispered. "I found you." Dorothy drove through the back streets, avoiding the main roads where people might see, and ask questions she could not answer. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, she watched Lily stroke the man's tattooed arm while he drifted in and out of consciousness, his head lolling against the window. "Mommy says you used to ride a big motorcycle," Lily told him softly. "She says you were brave." The man's eyes opened for one brief moment. Deep brown, clouded with pain and confusion, they found Lily's face and stayed there. His cracked lips moved, forming a word that never quite became sound. Then his eyes closed again, and the car was quiet except for the engine and Lily's gentle humming. Dorothy brought him to her house. It was a small place on a quiet street with lace curtains in the windows and a garden out front that she tended every morning before work. The living room was cramped but clean, with family photographs on every wall and a floral patterned couch that had been old when she bought it 20 years ago. She laid the man on that couch and Lily stood watch while Dorothy cleaned and bandaged his wound with the practiced hands of someone who had patched up 3 brothers and a husband in her time. The cut was deep but not fatal if infection did not set in. She applied pressure, cleaned the edges with peroxide, and wrapped him tight. Then she made coffee, because that was what you did in Dorothy Blaine's house when the world fell apart. You made coffee, and you sat down, and you waited. The man woke 2 hours later. His name was Ryder Callahan, and the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was a small girl sitting cross-legged on a wooden chair beside the couch, watching him with the focused intensity of a scientist observing a rare specimen. She held a worn teddy bear against her chest, and her pigtails had come loose on one side, giving her a lopsided, earnest appearance. "Hi, Daddy," she said. Ryder blinked. The room swam around him, unfamiliar lace curtains and family photographs, and the smell of fresh coffee and something floral he could not identify. His side burned like someone had pressed a hot coal against it, and his head throbbed with a deep pulsing ache that made thinking feel like wading through mud. "Where am I?" His voice came out raw, scraped clean of strength. "You're safe," said an older woman who appeared at his side, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "I'm Dorothy. This little one here is Lily. She found you." "Found me?" Ryder repeated the words without understanding them. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, his hand flying to his bandaged side as pain lanced through him. "Easy," Dorothy said. "You lost a lot of blood. Whatever happened to you, someone meant business." Ryder closed his eyes, reaching back through the fog of his memory. There were fragments. The rumble of a motorcycle engine, headlights in a dark road, the taste of blood in his mouth, then nothing. A blank wall where hours or days should have been. "I was riding," he said slowly. "Then it's just gone. Everything after that is blank." Dorothy studied him with careful eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen enough of life's cruelty to recognize when someone was telling the truth and when they were not. This man was telling the truth. His confusion was too raw, too genuine to be an act. "Can you tell me your name?" "Ryder. Ryder Callahan." "And what about before? Where were you coming from?" His hand drifted to the tattoo on his forearm, tracing the lines of a faded wolf's head without seeming to realize he was doing it. "I was traveling, moving around. Haven't stayed anywhere long in years." He hesitated, then added, "Not since I left the Iron Wolves." "A motorcycle club." Dorothy's voice was careful, neutral. Ryder nodded. "That was another life. I walked away from it 5 years ago. Or tried to." 5 years. The number hung in the air like a held breath. Lily looked up from her teddy bear. "5 years is how old I am," she said matter-of-factly. Ryder stared at her. Something in his chest shifted, a tectonic movement beneath the surface of his pain and confusion. Her eyes. There was something about her eyes that pulled at him, a familiarity he could not name, like hearing a song you have forgotten the words to but still feel in your bones. "Kid," he said carefully. "I'm not your—" "You are," Lily said with the unshakable conviction of someone who has never been taught to doubt herself. "Mommy has a picture of you. You're on a motorcycle and you're smiling. She looks at it when she thinks I'm sleeping." Ryder opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. The pain in his side flared, and with it a wash of dizziness that pulled him back toward darkness. Dorothy caught his head before it hit the armrest and lowered him gently. "Rest now," she said. "The answers can wait." But Lily did not wait. She climbed down from her chair and settled on the floor beside the couch, her teddy bear tucked under one arm, her other hand resting lightly on Ryder's scarred knuckles. "I'll stay with you, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Claire Whitfield's hands shook so badly she dropped her car keys twice before she could get the engine started. The phone call from her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, had been fragmented and breathless, something about Lily wandering off a hurt man Dorothy's house. The words tumbled together in Claire's mind like stones in a landslide. She backed out of the driveway too fast, the tires barking against the pavement, and drove through the suburban streets with a focus that bordered on tunnel vision. Her designer handbag slid off the passenger seat and onto the floor. She did not pick it up. The quarterly reports on her laptop, the client call she had been preparing for the dinner reservation Preston had made at the club, all of it evaporated like water on hot asphalt. Her daughter was somewhere she should not be with someone she did not know, and the distance between them felt like an ocean. Dorothy's house appeared through the windshield, its yellow paint and neat flower beds, looking impossibly calm for a place harboring whatever crisis had drawn Claire's child to it. She barely shifted the car into park before she was out of her heels, striking the concrete path in sharp, rapid beats. Her hand was raised to knock when she heard two voices through the screen door. "Mr. Bear wants to know if you like pancakes," Lilith was saying in her serious conversational tone, and then a man's voice, deep and rough like gravel tumbling in a riverbed. "Tell Mr. Bear I like them with blueberries." Claire's hand froze in the air. That voice, it reached into her chest and gripped something that had been sleeping there for 5 years, something she had buried under business plans and dinner parties, and the daily performance of being Preston Whitfield's wife. She knew that voice the way she knew her own heartbeat, not because she heard it often, but because it had once been the only sound in the world that mattered. She pushed open the screen door. The familiar creak announced her, but she barely heard it. The living room seemed to telescope around her walls, pulling back sound, dropping away until there was nothing but the man on the couch. Ryder Callahan. He was older. His beard was fuller, threaded with gray at the jaw. New lines creased the skin around his eyes, and a fresh bandage wrapped his left side where something terrible had happened. His leather vest was torn and dirty, the patches faded. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes that had once looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world full of shadows. Those eyes found hers, and the air between them caught fire. Neither of them spoke. The old clock on Dorothy's wall ticked its patient rhythm. Lily looked up from her teddy bear, her face breaking into a smile. "Mommy, look, I found him." He was hurt, but Miss Dorothy made him better. Claire gripped the doorframe. Her manicured nails dug into the worn wood until the paint cracked beneath them. She felt the careful architecture of her life, the walls she had built brick by careful brick, over 5 years of discipline and denial, begin to fracture. Ryder. His name left her mouth like a prayer and a wound at the same time. It tasted like summer nights on the back of a motorcycle, like freedom, like the worst mistake and the best memory of her life, inseparable, forever tangled together. Dorothy appeared from the kitchen, took one look at Claire's face, and quietly retreated. She knew when a room did not need a third voice. Ryder tried to sit up, wincing. His eyes had not left Claire's face. She looked different. The wild hair he remembered was now styled and smooth, the ripped jeans replaced by a tailored suit, the leather jacket traded for pearls. But beneath all of it, beneath the polish and the perfection, he could see her, the real her. The woman who used to laugh so hard she snorted, who once ate an entire pie on a dare, who kissed him in the rain behind her parents' house and whispered that she never wanted to be anywhere else. Claire. His voice cracked on her name. "You look different," she finished. "It's been a long time." 5 years collapsed into the space between them. 5 years of silence and wondering and lying awake in the dark, asking questions that had no answers. Lily tugged at Ryder's sleeve. "See, I told you Mommy would come." Claire crossed the room on legs that felt made of water. She sank into the armchair across from the couch, maintaining a distance that felt both necessary and absurd. This close, she could see the damage more clearly. Not just the fresh wound, but older scars, a thick line across his collarbone, a knot of scar tissue on his right forearm. The years had not been kind to him. "Lily says you're her father," Claire said. Her voice was steady, but her hands clasped in her lap were white at the knuckles. Ryder looked at Lily, then back at Claire. "Is it true?" Claire did not answer immediately. She looked at her daughter, at the way Lily leaned against Ryder's knee, without fear, without hesitation, with the kind of trust that children reserve for the people they know in their bones to be safe. "The timing," Claire whispered. "It would match." Ryder exhaled slowly. His fingers trembled where they rested on his thigh. "I don't remember leaving," he said. "I remember you. I remember that summer. But everything after our last night together, it's like someone took a knife to my memory and cut pieces out." "You were in the hospital," Claire said. "September 2015. Severe head trauma from a motorcycle accident. I found out later after you were already gone." Ryder pressed his fingers to his temples. "I remember the ride, the highway at night. Then nothing." Lily climbed up onto the couch beside him and tucked herself under his arm with the casual ease of someone who had been doing it her whole life. Ryder looked down at her, and Claire watched something happen to his face that she had never seen before. Not in all their wild months together, not in the heat of their fiercest arguments or their most tender moments. His expression crumbled. The walls behind his eyes gave way. And for one unguarded second, Ryder Callahan looked like a man who had just discovered that the world contained something worth staying in. "I have her eyes," Lily said, pointing to Claire. "But Mommy says I have your stubborn chin." A sound escaped Ryder that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. It was hard to tell which. Claire reached for her phone and stepped into the hallway, her hands still shaking. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she had saved weeks ago, when doubt first began to gnaw at the edges of her neat, controlled life. Tom Avery, private investigator, licensed, discreet. The ad had been clinical and reassuring. "Mr. Avery," she said when he answered, "my name is Claire Whitfield. I need you to look into someone for me." She gave him Ryder's full name, what little she knew about his past and the years he had been missing. Avery asked precise professional questions. He did not judge. He did not speculate. He simply gathered the facts and told her he would have preliminary findings within 48 hours. When Claire returned to the living room, Lily had fallen asleep against Ryder's side, her teddy bear wedged between them. Ryder sat perfectly still, as though afraid any movement might wake her. His eyes were wet. "She doesn't know me," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the sleeping child. "How can she trust me like this?" "Children don't need proof," Dorothy said from the kitchen doorway, where she had been quietly observing. "They feel the truth before they understand it." Claire sank back into the armchair. She watched Ryder watch Lily, and she felt the fault line in her life widen another inch. 48 hours later, Tom Avery called. Claire was in her home office, the door closed, the spreadsheets on her screen blurring into meaningless columns of numbers. She had not been able to focus on work since finding Ryder. Every email felt trivial. Every meeting felt like a performance. Even the house itself, the 4,000 square foot colonial that Preston had chosen with its perfectly coordinated rooms and professionally landscaped yard, felt like a movie set she had wandered onto by mistake. "Mrs. Whitfield," Avery said. His tone had shifted from professional neutrality to something more cautious. "I found quite a bit on Mr. Callahan." Claire pressed the phone tighter against her ear. "Tell me." Ryder Callahan had been a full-patch member of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club from 2009 to 2015. Multiple minor arrests, disturbing the peace, possession, one assault charge that was later dropped. Nothing that suggested he was a violent man by nature, but the company he kept was another matter entirely. The Iron Wolves were led by a man named Hawk Jennings. Under Hawk's leadership, the club had expanded from a regional outfit into something far more dangerous. Drug distribution, weapons trafficking, territorial disputes with rival clubs that left bodies on back roads from Nevada to Virginia. In late 2015, Avery continued, several members of the Iron Wolves either died or disappeared within a span of 3 months. The FBI opened an investigation but could not build a case. Ryder Callahan vanished during this same window. His last known record is a hospital admission in September 2015 for injuries sustained in a motorcycle collision. Claire's breath caught. September 2015. "Yes, ma'am. After that, nothing. No credit cards, no leases, no employment records, no tax filings. For 5 years, Ryder Callahan effectively ceased to exist." Claire stared at the wall of her office, at the framed diplomas and awards that documented her professional achievements, and felt them shrink into insignificance. "There's one more thing," Avery said. "The timeline of Callahan's disappearance coincides with the reports that Hawk Jennings was purging members he considered disloyal. 3 men connected to the Iron Wolves were found dead in the months surrounding Callahan's disappearance. All 3 had expressed interest in leaving the club. The implications settled over Claire like a cold fog. Ryder had not simply left. He had run, or been forced to run, and whoever had driven him away might have been trying to kill him. "Is Hawk Jennings still active?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's unclear at this time. I'll keep digging." Claire ended the call and sat in silence. The house was quiet around her. Preston was at the office. Lily was at Dorothy's, where she had been spending more and more time since Ryder's arrival, drawn to the man on the couch like a compass needle finding north. Claire opened the locked bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, beneath a layer of tissue paper, was a photograph. It showed a young woman with wild hair and ripped jeans sitting on the back of a motorcycle with her arms wrapped around a grinning man in a leather vest. Both of them looked impossibly young. Both of them looked happy in a way that Claire had not felt in years. She touched the photograph with her fingertip, tracing the line of Ryder's jaw, the same stubborn jaw that Lily had inherited. 5 years of silence. 5 years of building a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow at its core. And now the past had crashed back into her world, bloodied and broken and impossible to ignore. Claire put the photograph back in the box, closed the drawer, and stood up. She needed to see Ryder again. Not because she had answers, but because the questions were eating her alive. She found him on Dorothy's front porch, sitting in the late afternoon sun with his legs stretched out before him and his eyes fixed on something far away. His wounds were healing, color had returned to his face. But there was a weight to his posture, a heaviness in the set of his shoulders that told Claire the damage went deeper than skin. "We need to talk," she said. Ryder did not look up. "About what?" Claire pulled out the printed summary Avery had emailed her and sat in the wicker chair across from him. "About the Iron Wolves, about Hawk Jennings, about why you disappeared in 2015 and why you're lying to me about not remembering." His jaw tightened. The muscles in his forearm tensed, pulling the tattooed skin taut. "I'm not lying," he said. "Then explain to me how a man walks away from a gang where members are being murdered for trying to leave and conveniently forgets everything about it." Ryder was quiet for a long time. A bird sang somewhere in Dorothy's garden. The shadows on the porch lengthened as the sun dropped lower. "I told you," he said finally. "I took a bad fall. Hit my head. Some things came back. Some things didn't. That's not a choice. That's just what happened." 3 men died, Ryder. 3 men who wanted out of the Iron Wolves, same as you. And you vanished at the same time. Do you really expect me to believe that's a coincidence? Something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of recognition, quick as a fish breaking the surface of dark water. "I don't know what happened to those men," he said, but his voice had changed, dropped lower, tightened at the edges. "And whatever happened to me digging into it won't bring anything good." "My daughter thinks you're her father," Claire said, leaning forward. "I think she might be right, which means whatever danger followed you is now standing on our doorstep. I need to know what we're dealing with." Ryder turned to look at her for the first time since she sat down. His eyes held a war, the desire to protect, colliding with the weight of secrets he could not fully access. "You shouldn't be near me," he said. "Neither should Lily. That's not your decision to make. It is if keeping you safe means keeping you away." The words landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Claire felt their ripples expand outward, touching everything. She thought about Preston in his study, oblivious, about Lily at the kitchen table drawing pictures of stick figures holding hands, about the life she had constructed so carefully brick by brick, and how fragile it suddenly seemed. "I'm not the girl you left behind," Claire said quietly. "I don't scare easily anymore, and I don't walk away from things that matter." Ryder held her gaze. For a moment, just a moment, the wall behind his eyes cracked, and she saw something raw and wounded looking back at her. Then he turned away, and the wall rebuilt itself. "Some doors are better left closed," he said, but Claire had already opened them in him, and she knew with a certainty that settled into her bones like iron that she would not stop until she had the truth. All of it, no matter what it cost. That night, after Lily was asleep and the house was dark, Claire sat alone at her desk and opened her laptop. She typed Hawk Jennings Iron Wolves into the search bar and pressed enter. The screen filled with results, news articles, court records, mugshots of a man with dead eyes and a scar that split his left eyebrow in two. Claire read for hours, her coffee growing cold beside her, the clock on the wall ticking past midnight. What she found made her blood run cold. Hawk Jennings had not simply led a motorcycle club, he had built an empire on fear. Members who tried to leave were tracked, threatened, and in several documented cases killed. The FBI had investigated for years but could never get enough witnesses to testify. Anyone who knew anything either disappeared or went silent. And somewhere in the middle of that empire, Ryder Callahan had lived and ridden and breathed the same poisoned air. And then he had vanished just like the others. Only Ryder had survived. Claire closed the laptop and sat in the dark listening to the sounds of her sleeping house. The refrigerator hummed, a pipe ticked in the wall. From down the hall, she could hear the soft whisper of Lily's breathing through the baby monitor she still kept on her nightstand. She had wanted answers. Now she had the beginning of them, and they terrified her. But fear, Claire had learned, was not a reason to stop. It was a reason to keep going. For Lily, for the truth, for the man on Dorothy's couch who carried secrets in his scars and looked at her daughter with eyes that held both wonder and grief. She would find out what happened to Ryder Callahan 5 years ago. She would find out who hurt him and why. And she would protect her family, whatever shape that family was becoming, with everything she had. The decision settled over her like armor. Outside, the summer moon hung low and heavy over the rooftops of Ridgewood, casting silver light through the window and across Claire's determined face. Somewhere on the other side of town, on Dorothy Blaine's floral-patterned couch, Ryder Callahan lay awake in the dark, pressing his fingers against his temples, trying to reach the memories that hovered just beyond his grasp. And in her small bed in the room down the hall, Lily Whitfield slept soundly, her teddy bear tucked under her arm, a crayon drawing of three stick figures holding hands resting on her nightstand. She had labeled them in wobbly letters. Mommy, Daddy, me. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. Claire moved through her routines like a woman sleepwalking through someone else's life. She answered emails and attended conference calls and made dinner reservations she did not want to keep, and all the while her mind circled back to the same questions. Who was Ryder Callahan now? Who had he been before the accident, stole his memories, and what had happened in the darkness between those two versions of the same man? She visited Dorothy's house every afternoon, telling herself it was for Lily's sake. And it was partly. Lily had attached herself to Ryder with a ferocity that startled everyone, including Ryder himself. The little girl would sit beside him on the couch for hours, showing him her drawings, telling him stories about her school friends, asking him questions about motorcycles and tattoos with the unfiltered curiosity of a child who has not yet learned that some questions are supposed to be uncomfortable. Ryder answered every one. He told her about the open road, about the way the world looked from the back of a motorcycle at dawn, about the stars you could see when you rode through the desert at night. He told her about the wolf tattoo on his forearm, how it meant loyalty, how it meant family, how it meant something different to him now than it had when he first sat in that chair and let the needle do its work. He did not tell her about the blood. He did not tell her about the fear. He did not tell her about the nights he spent running from shadows he could not name, or the mornings he woke up in strange places with no memory of how he had gotten there. Those stories were for later, or maybe for never. But Claire saw them. She saw them in the way Ryder's eyes would go distant, sometimes staring at nothing, his hand unconsciously moving to cover the scar on his side. She saw them in the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way he positioned himself near the door whenever anyone entered the room, the way he slept with his boots on. He's afraid, Dorothy told Claire one evening after Ryder had fallen asleep on the couch and Lily had been tucked into the guest bed upstairs. They sat in Dorothy's kitchen, the older woman's hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her expression grave. Not of what's out there, of what's in here. She tapped her temple. The memories are coming back, and they're not kind. Has he said anything to you? Bits and pieces. He talks in his sleep sometimes, names I don't recognize, places that sound like they belong in a different world. Dorothy paused, choosing her words carefully. He said your name last night. Said it like a man drowning says the word air. Claire looked down at her own tea, watching the steam curl upward and disappear. I don't know what to do with that, Dorothy. Maybe you don't have to do anything with it right now. Maybe you just have to let it be what it is. And what is it? Dorothy's wise eyes crinkled at the corners. A second chance. For all of you. But second chances, Claire was learning, did not come without cost. Preston came home that evening in a mood that filled the house like smoke. Claire could feel it the moment she walked through the door, the charged atmosphere, the too perfect stillness that meant he was sitting somewhere in the dark waiting. She found him in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his laptop screen. You were at that woman's house again, he said without looking up. Claire set her purse on the hallway table. Dorothy's, yes. Lily likes spending time there. Lily likes spending time with that man. Preston closed his laptop with a soft click. And so it seems to you. Preston, this is not what you think. What I think, Preston said, standing and crossing the study to face her, is that my wife has been spending every available hour with a stranger who crawled out of a dumpster while our daughter calls him daddy and our marriage slowly dies of neglect. He paused, letting the words settle like sediment. Am I wrong? Claire wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell him he was being paranoid, possessive, unreasonable. But the truth was more complicated than any of those words, and she was too tired to lie. He's not a stranger, she said quietly. I knew him. Before you. Before us. The silence that followed was the kind that reshapes rooms. Preston's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes went very still, like a predator calculating the distance between itself and its prey. How well did you know him? Well enough. Preston set his glass down on the desk with a deliberateness that made Claire's skin prickle. Well enough that our daughter thinks he's her biological father. The question detonated in the quiet room. Claire felt its shockwave pass through her, rattling the carefully arranged pieces of her manufactured life. Children have imaginations, she managed. Children have instincts. Preston stepped closer. His cologne, expensive and precisely applied, filled the space between them. And Lily's instincts are telling her something that you seem unwilling to confirm or deny. Claire met his gaze. In 15 years of marriage, she had learned to read Preston's faces the way a sailor reads weather. This face meant danger. This face meant he had already made up his mind and was simply giving her the opportunity to dig herself deeper before he closed the trap. I'm not going to discuss this right now, she said. Then when Claire, because from where I'm standing, every day you spend with that man is another day our family comes closer to falling apart. She wanted to tell him that the family had been falling apart long before Ryder showed up, that the cracks in their marriage ran deeper than any tattoo, wider than any motorcycle rode, older than any memory she carried of a man with brown eyes and a leather vest. But the words caught in her throat and she walked away instead, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. The argument did not begin with shouting. It began the way most dangerous things begin, with silence. Preston Whitfield stood in the hallway of their colonial home, his briefcase still in his hand, his tie still knotted beneath his sharp jaw. He had come home early. That alone should have been a warning sign. Preston never came home early. His schedule was a fortress, every hour fortified against spontaneity, every minute accounted for. But today he had returned at 3 in the afternoon and he had found the house empty. Claire's car was gone. Lily's shoes were not by the door. The kitchen was cold, the dishwasher still full from the morning. He had checked Claire's office and found her laptop open to a search page filled with results about motorcycle clubs and criminal records and a man named Hawk Jennings. Preston sat down in Claire's office chair and read every tab she had left open. He read slowly, methodically, the way he reviewed case files at the firm. And when he was finished, he closed the laptop gently and placed his hands flat on the desk and stared at the wall where Claire's diplomas hung in their expensive frames. Then he waited. Claire came home at 5:30, her cheeks flushed from the drive, Lily chattering beside her about a birdhouse she was helping Ryder build in Dorothy's backyard. They came through the front door on a wave of laughter, Lily's small voice carrying the melody of the afternoon's happiness into the foyer. The laughter died when they saw Preston. He stood at the end of the hallway, his jacket removed, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His posture was perfectly controlled. His face showed nothing. It was the blankness that frightened Claire most, because she had learned over 15 years of marriage that Preston's stillness was the prelude to storms. Lily, Preston said, his voice measured and smooth, "Go to your room and play. Mommy and I need to talk." Lily looked at her mother, then at Preston, and something in her expression shifted, a wariness that no 5-year-old should possess. She went without arguing, to hear her small footsteps retreating up the stairs. The silence returned. "You've been visiting that man again," Preston said. It was not a question. "His name is Ryder." "I know his name." Preston swirled the whiskey in his glass without drinking it. "I also know his criminal record, his gang affiliations, the investigation the FBI ran on his club." He paused, letting the words settle. "You left your research open on your computer, Claire." Claire felt the floor shift beneath her feet, not literally, but something inside her tilted the way a building tilts in the moment before it falls. "I was looking into his background," she said carefully, "for Lily's sake." "For Lily's sake," Preston repeated the words as though tasting them for poison. "You've been spending time with an ex-convict who was found in a dumpster, and it's for Lily's sake." "He's not a convict. He was never convicted of anything serious." "Oh, I'm sorry. An ex-gang member with a rap sheet who turns up half dead in the garbage." "Much better." The sarcasm in Preston's voice was surgical, precise, designed to cut. Claire crossed her arms. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me the truth." Preston set down his glass. The crystal clicked against the granite countertop like a gavel. I want you to tell me why you've been going to that woman's house every day. Why Lily talks about this man like he's a member of our family. And why you look at me every night like you're somewhere else entirely. The truth. Claire almost laughed. The truth was a knot she had been trying to untangle for weeks, a snarl of old love and new fear, and a 5-year-old girl who saw the world with clearer eyes than any of them. Ryder and I knew each other, Claire said. Before you. Before us. It was a long time ago. How well did you know him? The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Claire could feel the walls of the conversation narrowing, funneling her toward a confession she was not ready to make. We were close, she said. Preston's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes hardened like concrete setting in a mold. Close, he repeated. And is that why our daughter calls him Daddy? The word detonated in the kitchen like a grenade. Claire felt the shrapnel of it pierce every defense she had built. Children say things, she managed. Children repeat what they're told. Preston stepped closer. Or what they sense. Lily is not stupid, Claire. She sees the way you look at this man. She sees you running to that house every chance you get, and she's drawing her own conclusions. Claire backed against the counter. The marble was cold through her blouse. You're making this into something it's not. So Preston reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded paper. He set it on the counter between them. I had my own investigator look into Mr. Callahan. I've had him on it for a week. Claire stared at the paper. Her stomach dropped. You investigated him. I protect my family. Preston's voice was steel. That's what I do. It's what I've always done. He unfolded the paper and flattened it with his palm. Ryder Callahan, born 1989, member of the Iron Wolves from 2009 to 2015. Multiple arrests, known associate of Hawk Jennings, who is currently under federal investigation for racketeering, drug trafficking, and murder. Claire felt the room spin. Currently under investigation. Not past tense. Present. That man, Preston continued, his finger tapping the paper, is connected to people who kill without hesitation. And you've been inviting him into our daughter's life. He left the gang, Claire said, but her voice had lost its strength. 5 years ago. People like that don't leave. Preston folded the paper and returned it to his pocket. They get pulled back in, or they bring the trouble with them wherever they go. He moved closer, and his shadow fell across Claire like a curtain. This ends now, Claire. You will not see that man again. You will not take Lily to that house. And if I find out you've been in contact with him, I will file for full custody of Lily, and I will win. The threat landed with the precision of a sniper's bullet. You wouldn't, Claire breathed. Try me. Preston picked up his whiskey and took a slow, deliberate sip. I have the resources, I have the connections, and I have a folder full of evidence that my wife has been associating with a known gang affiliate while our minor child was present. He set the glass down again. No judge in this county would side with you. Claire felt the walls close in. The kitchen with its imported tiles and professional-grade appliances, the kitchen she had once been so proud of, now felt like a cell. Every gleaming surface reflected her own trapped face back at her. Preston, listen to me. No, you listen. His composure cracked for the first time, and beneath it, she saw not just anger, but fear. Real fear. The fear of a man watching the foundations of his world develop fractures. I married you knowing about your past, knowing about that man, knowing everything. Claire's blood went cold. What? You think I didn't know? Preston's laugh was short and bitter. I had you investigated before I proposed Claire. That's what responsible people do. I knew about Ryder Callahan. I knew about your relationship. I knew you were pregnant when I asked you to marry me. The kitchen fell absolutely silent. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. You knew, Claire whispered, this whole time. I gave you a life, Preston said, and now his voice carried a tremor he could not fully control. I gave you stability. I gave Lily a name and a future and everything that man could never provide. And this is the thanks I get you running back to him the moment he crawls out of a gutter. Claire's legs weakened. She grabbed the edge of the counter to stay upright. 15 years. 15 years of marriage and the foundation of it had been a lie she never knew existed. Preston had known about Ryder, had known about the pregnancy, had married her anyway, not out of love, not out of passion, but out of some calculated decision that Claire could not yet understand. Why, she asked, if you knew everything, why did you marry me? Preston was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of its courtroom precision. Because you needed saving, he said, and I needed someone to save. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, and it broke her heart in ways she did not expect. That's not love, Claire said softly. That's ownership. Preston flinched. The word hit him in a place his armor did not cover. He picked up his glass and walked out of the kitchen without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway toward his study. Claire stood alone in the gleaming kitchen and let the tears come. Meanwhile, at Dorothy's house, Ryder sat on the back porch watching fireflies pulse in the garden like tiny drifting heartbeats. The evening air carried the smell of cut grass and Dorothy's jasmine bushes, sweet and heavy, and nothing like the diesel and asphalt world he had known for most of his adult life. Lily had gone to bed an hour ago, but he could still feel the ghost of her hand in his small and warm and absolutely trusting. She had asked him to tell her a bedtime story, and he had made one up on the spot, a story about a wolf who was lost in a big forest and found his way home by following the sound of a little bird singing. Lily had fallen asleep before the wolf reached the edge of the trees, her breathing going soft, and even her teddy bear clutched against her chest. Ryder had sat beside her bed for a long time after that, just watching her sleep, trying to understand how this tiny person had cracked open a part of him he thought was sealed shut forever. Dorothy came out with 2 cups of coffee and settled into the chair beside him. She did not speak for a while, content to let the evening sounds fill the silence between them. It was one of the things Ryder appreciated most about her. She understood that not all quiet needed to be filled. "You're remembering more," she said finally. It was not a question. Ryder nodded slowly. "It comes in flashes, like someone shining a light into a dark room for just a second, and then it's gone again." "What do you see?" He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "A warehouse, the smell of motor oil and sawdust. A man with a scar through his eyebrow telling me that nobody leaves, that the only way out is in a box." Dorothy's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "That sounds like a threat." It was. Ryder rubbed his face with both hands as though trying to wipe away the memory. "I think I knew before the accident that leaving the club was going to cost me something. I just didn't know the price would be everything." "You remember Claire?" It was not a question, but Ryder answered anyway. "I remember how she smelled, like vanilla and something else, something green like fresh-cut grass. I remember the way she laughed, how it would start quiet and then build until she couldn't breathe. I remember wanting to be better for her, wanting to deserve her. And now," Ryder looked at the fireflies pulsing in the dark. "Now I look at her and I see everything I lost, everything I might have had. And I look at Lily and I see everything I might still lose if the past catches up." Dorothy reached over and patted his arm the way she might pat the arm of a grandson or a friend or someone she had known for years instead of weeks. "That little girl in there," she said firmly, "didn't find you by accident. I've lived long enough to know that some things happen for a reason. You can spend the rest of your life running from what was, or you can stay put and build something new." Ryder turned to look at her. In the porch light, her face was lined and weathered and full of a kindness that he had done nothing to earn. What if staying puts them in danger? What if leaving breaks them? The question hung in the evening air, mixing with the scent of jasmine and the pulse of fireflies, and Ryder did not have an answer. 2 days later, Ryder made his decision. It happened in the early morning before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops. He had been lying awake on Dorothy's couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle and creak around him. His side was mostly healed now, the wound reduced to a tight, itching scar that pulled when he moved too quickly. But the wound in his mind was tearing wider by the day. The memories were coming back. Not all at once, not in clean, orderly sequences, but in flashes that struck like lightning and left after images burned into his consciousness. He remembered Hawk Jennings's face, the dead eyes, the scar that split his eyebrow. He remembered a meeting in a warehouse, the smell of oil and sawdust, and Hawk's voice saying, You don't get to leave. Nobody leaves. He remembered riding his motorcycle through the night, the engine screaming beneath him and headlights appearing in his mirrors, getting closer. He remembered the impact, the sound of metal tearing, the feeling of flying through darkness. And he remembered with a clarity that cut him to the bone the moment before he left Claire, standing outside her window in the dark, watching her sleep, knowing that if he stayed, Hawk would come for her. That the man who killed three of his own brothers without blinking would not hesitate to destroy a woman whose only crime was being loved by someone who wanted out. Ryder had left to save her, and the leaving had nearly killed him. Now he was back, and the danger was back with him. Preston's investigation proved that if a civilian lawyer could dig up his connection to the Iron Wolves in a week, then Hawk's people, if they were still looking, could find him too. And if they found him here in this quiet suburban neighborhood with a woman and a child who had his eyes, the consequences would be catastrophic. Ryder sat up on the couch and began to pack. He moved quietly, folding his few possessions into his worn leather bag. The flannel shirt Dorothy had given him, a razor he'd bought at the general store, the silver dog tags that had hung around his neck since his service days. He placed each item carefully as though the act of packing neatly could somehow make what he was doing less devastating. He left a note on the kitchen table. 3 words, "I'm sorry." He was at the front door, his hand on the knob, when a small voice spoke from the top of the stairs. "You're leaving." Ryder closed his eyes. Of all the things he had feared, this was the worst. He turned slowly and looked up. Lily stood on the top step in her pajamas, her teddy bear dangling from one hand, her hair tangled from sleep. Her eyes were wide and filling with tears, and her bottom lip trembled with a violence that seemed to shake her entire small body. "You promised," she whispered. "You promised you wouldn't go without saying goodbye." Ryder set his bag down. His throat felt like someone had filled it with sand. "Lily, sweetheart, I need to." "No." She came down the stairs fast, her bare feet slapping the wood, and threw herself against him with the force of a child who has learned that holding on is the only way to keep the world from falling apart. Her arms locked around his waist, her face pressed into his shirt. "You can't go. You said you'd teach me to be brave. You can't teach me brave if you leave." Ryder stood frozen. His hands hovered over her small shoulders, trembling, afraid to touch her, afraid that holding her would make it impossible to let go. "Your mom and Preston need space," he said. The words sounded hollow even to him. "I'm making things harder for everyone by being here." Lily pulled back and looked up at him with eyes that were red and fierce and absolutely undeceived. "You're not making things harder. You're making things true." The words hit Ryder like a hammer. "You understand me," Lily continued, her voice cracking. "You're the only one. Daddy Preston wants me to be quiet and sit still and eat with the right fork. Mommy is always on the phone or worried about something. But you listen when I talk about the clouds. You don't tell me to stop climbing trees." Dorothy appeared at the top of the stairs, her robe pulled tight around her. She looked at Ryder. She looked at Lily. She said nothing. She simply came down the stairs, touched Lily's hair once gently, and retreated to the kitchen. Ryder knelt. The movement pulled at his healing wound, but he barely noticed. He put his hands on Lily's shoulders and looked into her tear-streaked face. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I'm scared that the things in my past will hurt you. Hurt your mom. I couldn't live with that." "But you leaving hurts," Lily said. "That hurts right now." There was no argument against a child's honesty. Ryder felt his resolve crumble like a dam breaking under too much pressure. He pulled Lily against his chest and held her while she cried, and somewhere in the center of his broken, scattered memory, a door opened, and he remembered what it felt like to belong somewhere. "I'll stay," he said, "for a little while longer." Lily's sobs softened. She pulled back and wiped her nose on his shirt, leaving a wet streak across the flannel. "Promise. Promise." She hugged him once more, fierce and tight, then padded back up the stairs with her teddy bear, turning once at the top to make sure he was still there. He was, but staying Ryder knew would cost something. He just did not know yet how much. Claire came to Dorothy's house that afternoon and found Ryder sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. His bag was back inside, unpacked. Dorothy had told her about the morning, about Lily's tears, about the promise. "You tried to leave," Claire said, sitting beside him. "I should have. But you didn't, because your daughter has a way of making the right decision impossible to avoid. Claire almost smiled. She gets that from you. Ryder turned to look at her. His expression was stripped of defenses, raw and open in a way she had never seen. Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. She nodded. My memory's coming back. Pieces of it. And what I'm remembering isn't good. He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't leave you by choice 5 years ago. Hawk Jennings, the leader of the Iron Wolves, he came to me the night before I disappeared. Told me that if I tried to leave the club, he'd come after the people I cared about. Claire's breath stopped. He knew about you. Ryder continued, his voice low and steady, as though he were reciting facts from a great distance. He knew where you lived. He described your daily routine. He told me that if I didn't disappear permanently, he would make sure you wished you had. The afternoon seemed to darken around them. The birdsong faded. The breeze stilled. So I left, Ryder said. I got on my bike and I rode until I couldn't anymore. I crashed outside a town I'd never heard of, and when I woke up in the hospital, half my memory was gone. The parts about Hawk, about why I ran about you, they were just shadows I couldn't hold. Claire's hands covered her mouth. Tears spilled over her fingers. I've spent 5 years wandering, Ryder said, sleeping in shelters, working odd jobs, trying to remember something I didn't even know I'd forgotten. And then I ended up in that dumpster, and a little girl with my eyes found me, and the world cracked open. Someone put you in that dumpster, Claire said through her tears. Someone hurt you, was it? I don't know, Ryder said. That part is still dark, but if Hawk's people found me once they can find me again, and if they find me here near you and Lily, then we deal with it together, Claire said. Ryder shook his head. You don't know what these men are capable of, and you don't know what I'm capable of. Claire's voice hardened, and through the tears, Ryder saw something he had almost forgotten. The fire. The fierce, stubborn, unbreakable fire that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. I've spent 5 years pretending to be someone I'm not, living in a house that feels like a museum, married to a man who treats me like a trophy. I'm done running from the truth, Ryder. All of it. He stared at her. Claire, you left to protect me. Fine, I understand, but I'm not the scared girl you left behind. I'm a mother. And nobody, not Hawk Jennings, not Preston, not even you, is going to make me choose between keeping my daughter safe and keeping my daughter's father in her life. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full charged with everything they had lost and everything they might still reclaim. Ryder reached out and took her hand. His fingers were rough, scarred, trembling slightly. Hers were smooth, manicured, gripping his with a strength that surprised them both. Okay, he said, together. Dorothy watched them through the kitchen window, holding her coffee cup with both hands, and allowed herself a small, knowing smile. That evening, while Lily slept upstairs at Dorothy's house with her teddy bear and her dreams of birdhouses, Claire sat at the kitchen table and called Tom Avery again. I need to know about Hawk Jennings, she said. Everything. Where he is now, whether he's still a threat, whether anyone connected to the Iron Wolves has been active in this area recently. Avery was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Whitfield, if you're dealing with the Iron Wolves, this is above my pay grade. You might want to consider contacting law enforcement. Not yet, Claire said. I need information first. I need to know what I'm working with before I decide how to fight it. Understood. I'll have a full report within the week. Claire hung up and stared at the phone in her hand. Outside, the night pressed against the windows of Dorothy's kitchen, and somewhere in the dark, the past was still out there, circling, waiting. But for the first time in 5 years, Claire did not feel alone. The next morning brought a clarity that felt almost physical, like stepping out of a fog and finding solid ground beneath your feet. Claire sat at Dorothy's kitchen table with a legal pad in front of her, making lists. She had always been a list maker. It was the one trait from her corporate life that served her well in every arena. When the world grew chaotic, she wrote things down. When the path ahead was unclear, she drew a map. The list had 2 columns. On the left, things I know. On the right, things I need to find out. She knew that Ryder had been a member of the Iron Wolves. She knew that Hawk Jennings had threatened her life to force Ryder to leave. She knew that 3 other members who tried to leave the club had been found dead. She knew that Ryder's motorcycle accident had stolen pieces of his memory. And she knew with a mother's bone-deep certainty that Lily's connection to this man was real. The things she did not know filled the right column much faster. She did not know where Hawk Jennings was now. She did not know who had attacked Ryder and left him in the dumpster. She did not know whether the Iron Wolves were still active, still dangerous, still capable of reaching into her quiet suburban world and tearing it apart. And she did not know what she was going to do about Preston. Dorothy placed a fresh cup of coffee beside the legal pad and sat down across from her. She did not ask what Claire was writing. She simply sat her presence as steady and comforting as the old house itself and waited for Claire to speak. "I need to talk to him," Claire said, finally looking up. "Preston, I need to tell him the truth. All of it. All of it. I'm tired of half-truths and lies of omission. I'm tired of living inside a story that someone else wrote." Claire set her pen down. "He deserves honesty, even if the honesty destroys what's left of us." Dorothy nodded slowly. "And if he fights you, then I fight back. But I do it honestly. I do it knowing who I am and what I want." "And what do you want, Claire?" The question settled over her like a warm blanket. Claire looked through the window to where Ryder was sitting on the back porch mending a loose board with a hammer and nails Dorothy had given him. His movements were careful and precise, the hands of a man who understood tools and materials and the satisfaction of making broken things whole. "I want to stop pretending," Claire said. "I want my daughter to grow up knowing the truth about where she comes from. And I want a chance to find out if the life I imagine for myself is still possible." Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then you have your answer." The confrontation with Preston came 3 days later. Claire had spent those days in a state of crystallizing resolve. She had consulted a family attorney in the next town over, quietly paying in cash to keep the visit off any records Preston might access. She had reviewed her financial situation, her options, her rights. She had spoken with Dorothy for hours, drawing strength from the older woman's quiet wisdom. And she had made her decision. She found Preston in his study after Lily had gone to bed. He sat behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by law books and leather furniture, the uniform of authority and control. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression made him set down his pen. "I want a divorce," Claire said. The words fell into the room like stones into deep water. Preston leaned back in his chair. His face showed nothing, but his fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "I've never thought more clearly in my life. This is about him." "This is about me," Claire said. "About who I am when I'm not pretending to be the woman you want me to be." Preston stood up. He moved around the desk slowly, deliberately, until he stood in front of her. He was taller by several inches, and he used that height now looming, filling her field of vision. "If you go through with this," he said, his voice low and controlled, "I will fight you for custody. I have the evidence. A wife who consorts with known criminals, who exposes a minor child to dangerous individuals. No judge will—" "I've spoken to an attorney," Claire interrupted, "and she disagrees with your assessment." Something flickered across Preston's face. Surprise. Then something darker. "You went behind my back. You married me behind mine." Claire's voice did not waver. "You knew about Ryder. You knew about the pregnancy. You built our entire marriage on a secret, and you kept it for 15 years. If anyone's credibility is compromised in a courtroom, Preston, it's yours." The silence that followed was the longest of Claire's life. She watched Preston's expression cycle through a dozen emotions: anger, disbelief, calculation, fear, before settling into a rigid mask of composure. "You'll regret this," he said. "Maybe," Claire said, "but I'd regret staying more." She turned and walked out of the study, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She made it to the hallway before her legs began to shake. She made it to the kitchen before the tears came. She stood at the sink, gripping the edge of the counter, and let herself break apart for exactly 90 seconds. Then she wiped her face, straightened her spine, and began to plan. The next morning, Claire drove to Dorothy's house with a suitcase in the trunk and a sleeping Lily in the back seat. Dorothy opened the door before she could knock, took one look at Claire's face, and stepped aside without a word. "Can we stay here tonight?" Claire asked. "You can stay as long as you need," Dorothy said. Ryder appeared in the hallway, alerted by the sound of Claire's voice. He took in the suitcase, the circles under her eyes, the way she held Lily against her hip like a shield. "What happened?" he asked. "I told Preston I want a divorce." Claire's voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "He threatened to take Lily." Ryder's expression hardened. The softness he had been learning to show, the gentleness that Lily had coaxed out of him, retreated behind a wall of protective fury. "He won't," Ryder said. "He has money, lawyers, connections. And you have the truth." Ryder took a step closer. "That counts for something." Claire looked at him. This man who had been found bleeding in a dumpster 3 weeks ago, who had no money, no home, no stable history, who carried the scars of a violent past on his body and the gaps of a broken memory in his mind. And yet, standing there in Dorothy's narrow hallway, he was the most solid thing in her world. "I need to find a place for Lily and me," Claire said, "somewhere safe while the divorce goes through." "You'll stay here," Dorothy said firmly from the kitchen doorway. "Both of you, this house has seen harder times and held together just fine." Claire opened her mouth to protest, but Dorothy raised a hand. "Don't argue with me, child. I've been stubborn longer than you've been alive." Despite everything, Claire almost laughed. But the moment of lightness was brief, because that same evening, after Lily was asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Claire's phone buzzed with a message from Tom Avery. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time, her hands growing cold around the phone. Avery had completed his investigation into Hawk Jennings and the Iron Wolves. The report contained dozens of pages of documentation, timelines, interview notes, and cross-references. But the detail that mattered, the one that changed everything, was contained in a single paragraph near the end. Hawk Jennings had been arrested 18 months ago on federal racketeering charges. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 45 years in a maximum security facility. But he never served the sentence. 8 months into his incarceration, Hawk Jennings died of a brain aneurysm in the prison infirmary. The man who had terrorized Ryder. The man who had forced him to abandon the woman he loved. The man whose shadow had stretched across 5 years of their lives, poisoning everything it touched. He was dead. He had been dead for nearly 2 years. Claire set the phone down on the kitchen table and stared at the wall. The clock ticked. The house breathed. And somewhere in the back bedroom, Ryder Callahan slept on a borrowed cot, haunted by the ghost of a man who no longer existed. The cage door was open. It had been open for 2 years, and none of them had known. Claire picked up her phone and walked down the hallway to the room where Ryder slept. She knocked once softly. "Ryder," she said through the door. "Wake up. I need to tell you something." And Ryder sat on the edge of the cot, his hands hanging between his knees, staring at the phone Claire had placed in his palm. The screen glowed in the dim room, the text of Avery's report burning itself into his eyes. Hawk Jennings. Dead. The words did not make sense. For years, Hawk had been the monster under every bed, the reason Ryder could not sleep, could not stay, could not love, without the fear of what it would cost. Hawk had been the hand that pushed him out into the cold, and the voice that whispered, "You can never go back," every time Ryder closed his eyes. And now he was gone, erased from the earth by a blood vessel that burst in a prison cell 800 miles away. No gunfight, no dramatic confrontation. Just biology, quiet and indifferent, doing what all the FBI investigations and witness testimony could not. 2 years, Ryder said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "He's been dead for 2 years. Claire stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. "Yes, I've been running from a ghost." "We both have." Ryder set the phone on the cot beside him and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The memories that had been returning in fragments now rushed in like a broken dam. He remembered Hawk's warehouse, the smell of diesel and fear. He remembered the exact shape of the threat, the flat, casual way Hawk had described what he would do to Claire if Ryder did not vanish. He remembered riding into the night, the engine beneath him, the only thing keeping him from screaming. And he remembered the crash, the darkness, the hospital room with its beeping machines and white ceiling, the nurse asking him his name, and the terrifying blankness when he tried to answer. 5 years of wandering. 5 years of sleeping in shelters and eating from cans and working jobs that paid in cash because he had no identity left to offer. 5 years of reaching for a memory that slipped through his fingers like water. All because of a man who had been dead since before Lily found him in that dumpster. "It's over," Claire said softly. The threat, the danger. It's over, Ryder. He looked up at her. In the low light, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes bright with tears, she was trying not to shed. She looked like a doorway to a life he had stopped believing was possible. Is it? He asked. Because I've got nothing, Claire. No money, no home, a memory full of holes and a past that reads like a criminal record. What kind of life can I give you? What kind of father can I be? Claire crossed the room and knelt in front of him. She took his scarred hands in hers and held them the way you hold something precious that has been broken and needs to be handled with care. You can be the father who stayed, she said, the one who chose to stay even when it was hard. That's all Lily needs. That's all I need. Ryder looked down at their joined hands, his rough and tattooed and trembling, hers smooth and steady and warm. Two lives that should never have intersected, that had been torn apart by violence and fear, and that had somehow impossibly found their way back to each other in the most unlikely way. A 5-year-old girl and a dumpster and a butterfly with orange-tipped wings. I'm scared, he admitted. So am I. I don't know how to do this, any of it. Neither do I. But we'll figure it out. He searched her face for doubt and found none. Only the fierce, stubborn certainty that he had fallen in love with all those years ago, tempered, now by time and pain, into something stronger, something unbreakable. Okay, he said. I'm done running. Claire leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, feeling the same heartbeat pulse through their joined hands. In the room down the hall, Lily stirred in her sleep, smiled at some dream she would not remember, and pulled her teddy bear closer. The next morning, Claire told Lily the news. They were sitting at Dorothy's kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window, the smell of pancakes filling the small room. Dorothy stood at the stove, flipping blueberry pancakes with the practiced ease of someone who had been feeding people her whole life. Lily, Claire said, reaching across the table to take her daughter's hand, I need to tell you something important. Lily looked up from her pancake, a smear of blueberry on her chin. Her eyes were cautious, the way they had been since the night Ryder almost left. Is it good or bad? She asked. It's good, baby. It's very good. Ryder appeared in the doorway, and Lily's face transformed. The caution evaporated, replaced by a joy so pure it filled the room like sunlight. Ryder isn't going anywhere, Claire said. The bad things from his past, the things that made him leave a long time ago, they can't hurt us anymore. He's safe. We're all safe. Lily slid down from her chair and crossed the kitchen to where Ryder stood. She looked up at him with those familiar brown eyes and said very seriously, Does that mean you can come to my school play? Ryder knelt down. I wouldn't miss it. And build me a tree house, the best tree house in the state. And stay forever. Ryder's throat tightened. He looked at Claire over Lily's head, and she nodded, her eyes shining. Yeah, kid, he said, his voice rough as gravel. Forever sounds about right. Lily threw her arms around his neck. Dorothy turned away from the stove and dabbed her eyes with her apron. Claire watched the two of them, the huge man with the tattoos and the tiny girl with the pigtails, and felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not the manufactured peace of a perfect house with perfect furniture, but the real kind. The kind that lives in your bones and does not depend on anything being perfect at all. The search for a new beginning led them north. Claire had been researching small towns in the mountain regions, places with good schools and quiet streets, and the kind of anonymity that would let them build a life without the weight of their pasts pressing in from every direction. She found it in a town called Millhaven, population 400, nestled in a valley between two ridges of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The town had a general store, a diner, a school that served kindergarten through 8th grade, and a garage run by an old mechanic who was looking for help. It had clean air and clear water, and the kind of neighbors who waved from their porches without asking questions. Ryder drove up first to look at the cabin. It sat at the end of a dirt road surrounded by pines, small but solid, with a stone chimney and a porch that looked out over the valley. He walked through the room, testing the floors, checking the windows, and felt something loosen in his chest. The cabin was quiet. It smelled like wood and mountain air and possibility. He called Claire that evening. I found our place, he said. They moved on a Tuesday. Claire loaded the car with boxes, while Lily supervised from the back seat, her teddy bear buckled in beside her. Dorothy stood on her porch watching them pack, her silver hair catching the early morning light, her expression a complicated mixture of happiness and sorrow. "You come visit," Dorothy said firmly, pulling Claire into a fierce hug. "Every holiday, every birthday. I mean it." "We will," Claire promised, "and you're always welcome. Always." Dorothy bent down to Lily's level and pressed a small wrapped package into her hands. "For when you miss me," she said. Lily opened it later in the car. It was a photograph of the four of them taken on Dorothy's porch the week before Dorothy, Claire Ryder, and Lily squinting into the sunset, all of them smiling. Dorothy had written on the back in her neat, careful handwriting, "Family is not always the people you are born to. Sometimes it is the people who find you." Lily held the photograph against her chest for the rest of the drive. The road to Millhaven wound through hills that grew taller, with each mile the trees thickening, from suburban maples to mountain pines that stood like sentinels along the ridges. The air changed as they climbed, growing cooler and sharper, carrying the scent of earth and evergreen. Lily pressed her face against the window. "Everything's so big here," she whispered. "Wait until you see the cabin," Claire said. Ryder was waiting on the porch when they arrived. He had spent the previous week preparing, patching the roof, stocking the kitchen, building a shelf in Lily's room, and painting it with flowers and butterflies. When Lily saw the shelf, she stood in the doorway of her new room and stared at it for a full 30 seconds before launching herself at Ryder with enough force to stagger him. "You made this for me." "Every nail," he said. That first evening, they ate dinner at the kitchen table, and all three of them passing bowls of pasta and salad and talking over each other the way families do. Lily described every tree she had seen on the drive. Claire talked about the wildflowers growing along the path to the cabin. Ryder said very little, but he smiled more in that single meal than he had in the previous 5 years combined. After dinner, Lily insisted on a walk. They followed the trail that wound behind the cabin through a meadow of tall grass to a clearing where you could see the whole valley spread out below like a painting. The sunset turned the mountains gold, then amber, then a deep, rich purple that seemed to pulse with its own light. "This is the best place in the world," Lily announced, Claire reaching for Ryder's hand. His fingers closed around hers, rough and warm and sure. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think it might be." The weeks that followed were filled with the ordinary magic of a new life finding its shape. Ryder fixed the cabin's leaking faucet and built a birdhouse with Lily that they hung from the pine tree outside her window. He found work at the garage in town, his mechanical skills honed during years of keeping motorcycles running on empty roads, proving valuable to the old mechanic who owned the place. The work was honest and steady, and Ryder discovered that there was a satisfaction in repairing things that went deeper than any thrill he had ever felt on the open road. Claire set up a small office in the cabin's second bedroom, the one with the window that looked out over the meadow, and began taking freelance consulting work. The corporate world she had left behind felt distant now, like a dream she had woken from. She did not miss the suits or the meetings or the quarterly reports. She missed nothing about the life she had shared with Preston. She took on clients she believed in and turned down the rest. For the first time in her career, she worked not because she had to prove something, but because she genuinely enjoyed it. Lily started at the local school and made friends within the first week. She came home each afternoon with stories about frogs in the creek, about a boy named Marcus who could climb higher than anyone, about her teacher, Mrs. Beckwith, who let them have class outside when the weather was warm. The shy, watchful child who had tiptoed around Preston's strict expectations was transforming into someone bolder, louder, more fully herself. She laughed more. She asked more questions. She climbed every tree she could find and reported back on what the world looked like from the top. "Daddy," Lily said one evening, looking up from her homework at the kitchen table. The words still sent a current through Ryder's chest every time he heard it. "Can you help me with my math?" He sat beside her, his large frame dwarfing the small chair, and together they worked through addition problems, while Claire cooked dinner in the cabin filled with the smell of roasting chicken and rosemary. Ryder's patience surprised Claire. He never rushed Lily, never showed frustration when she got an answer wrong. He would simply say, "Let's try that one again," and guide her through the problem with a steadiness that seemed to anchor the entire room. It was ordinary. It was unremarkable. It was the most extraordinary thing any of them had ever experienced. The rhythms of their new life settled into something comfortable. Morning routines established themselves without discussion. Ryder made coffee while Claire packed Lily's lunch. They walked Lily to the bus stop together, her small hands swinging between theirs. On weekends, they explored the trails around the cabin, Lily running ahead, pointing out birds and interesting rocks, while Ryder and Claire followed at a slower pace, talking about the small things that fill a life. Grocery lists, home repairs, plans for the garden Claire wanted to plant in spring. They did not talk about the past as often now, not because it had been forgotten, but because the present had grown large enough to contain them. The past was a room they could visit when they chose, not a prison they were locked inside. But even in Millhaven, the past was not entirely finished with them. The letter arrived on a Thursday, 3 months after they had moved. It was addressed to Claire, forwarded from Dorothy's house, and it bore the return address of a law firm in the city they had left behind. Claire recognized the firm. It was Preston's firm. She opened it at the kitchen table after Lily had gone to school, her hands steady but her heart racing. Ryder stood by the window watching her face. The letter was from Preston's attorney. It outlined the terms of the divorce settlement. It was fair, surprisingly so. Preston was not contesting custody. He was offering a reasonable division of assets. He was agreeing to the terms Claire's attorney had proposed weeks ago. But it was the second envelope inside the first that stopped Claire's breath. This one was handwritten, addressed to her in Preston's precise script. She opened it slowly and read, "Claire, I have spent 3 months trying to understand what happened to us, and I have come to a conclusion that I should have reached years ago. I married you because I thought I could build a life by controlling every variable. I thought that if everything was in its proper place, happiness would follow. I was wrong. You were never a variable to be controlled. You were a person I should have loved better than I did. I am signing the divorce papers. I will not fight you for Lily. She belongs with her mother, and if what I've been told is true, with her father. Enclosed is a letter for Lily. I would be grateful if you would give it to her when you feel the time is right. I wish you well. All three of you. Preston Whitfield." Claire set the letter down. Tears ran silently down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of relief, and beneath the relief, a complicated gratitude for a man who had failed her in 100 ways, but had in the end done the one thing she needed most. He had let go. Ryder moved to the table and sat beside her. He read the letter, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set it down and was quiet for a long time. "I didn't expect that," he said finally. "Neither did I. He's not the villain I wanted him to be." "People rarely are," Claire said. "Not entirely." She picked up the smaller envelope, the one addressed to Lily, and held it for a moment. Then she placed it in the drawer of her desk beside the wooden box that still held the photograph of a young woman on the back of a motorcycle. She would give it to Lily when the time was right. The months that followed felt like something out of a story Lily might have made up, too good to be real, yet stubbornly, beautifully real all the same. Ryder volunteered at Lily's school, teaching a weekly workshop on mechanical repairs. The children loved him, drawn to his quiet patience and the way he treated even the simplest question with genuine respect. The tattoos that had once marked him as an outsider now made him fascinating to a generation of children raised on superhero movies. They would crowd around him during recess, asking about each design, and Ryder would tell them stories, cleaned up versions of the truth about what each tattoo meant and when he got it. The old mechanic at the garage, a man named Walt Fincher, who had been fixing engines since before Ryder was born, took a liking to him. Walt was gruff and plain-spoken and did not care about a man's past as long as his present involved showing up on time and knowing the difference between a crescent wrench and a socket wrench. Ryder did both, and Walt rewarded him with steady hours and the occasional invitation to Sunday dinner at his farmhouse down the road. Claire's consulting business grew steadily. She found that the skills she had developed in Preston's corporate world organization, communication, strategic thinking, transferred perfectly to the quieter pace of remote work. Her clients valued her directness and her ability to cut through complexity to find simple solutions. She worked in the mornings while Lily was at school and closed her laptop when the bus dropped her daughter off at the end of the dirt road. And Lily bloomed. She joined the school's nature club and spent her Saturdays leading younger children on hikes through the mountain trails. She built a collection of feathers and stones and pressed wildflowers that filled the shelf Ryder had made for her. She read voraciously, loved, fiercely climbed every tree she could find, and looked at the world with the same wide-eyed wonder that had led her to a butterfly and a dumpster on a hot summer afternoon. She also asked questions, lots of them, about the Iron Wolves, about why Ryder had been gone so long, about Preston and why they did not live in the big house anymore. Claire and Ryder answered as honestly as they could, translating adult truths into language a 6-year-old could understand. Sometimes people have to go away to keep the people they love safe. Ryder told her one evening when she asked why he had not been there when she was a baby. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means the world is more complicated than it should be. Lily considered this for a moment, her face scrunched in the expression she wore when she was thinking hard about something. Like when you hide during hide and seek, she said finally. You're not gone, you're just waiting to be found. Ryder felt his throat tighten. Yeah, he said. Exactly like that. Dorothy came to visit for Thanksgiving. She arrived with 3 pies, a suitcase, and the firm announcement that she was staying for a week and nobody was going to argue with her about it. She sat on the porch with Ryder in the evenings drinking coffee and watching the sun set behind the mountains. You look different, she told him one night. Different how lighter, like you finally put down whatever you were carrying. Ryder looked out at the valley where the last light was fading behind the western ridge. I think I did, he said. Good, because that little girl in there needs a father who's present, not one who's always looking over his shoulder. Yes, ma'am. Dorothy patted his arm. You're a good man, Ryder Callahan. I knew it the day we pulled you out of that dumpster. You didn't look convinced at the time. I was convinced. I was also terrified. The two aren't mutually exclusive. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one above the mountain peaks. The day before Dorothy left, she and Claire took a long walk through the meadow while Ryder and Lily worked on a new birdhouse in the garage. The grass was brown now, flattened by the first frosts, and the trees had shed most of their leaves, exposing the bare architecture of the mountain slopes. But the air was clean and sharp, and the sky was the deep, impossible blue that only comes in late autumn. You did the right thing, Dorothy said, her arm linked through Claire's. Leaving, coming here, all of it. I know, Claire said, but some mornings I wake up and I'm still surprised that it's real, that I actually did it. That's normal. You spent 15 years living inside a life that didn't fit. It takes time to get used to one that does. They walked in silence for a while, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. What about you, Dorothy? Claire asked. That big house must feel empty without anyone to fuss over. Dorothy waved a hand dismissively. I've got my garden, my church group, my neighbors who can't seem to boil water without burning something. She paused, then added more quietly. But I miss having a child in the house, the sound of small feet running, the way everything seems more important when you're explaining it to someone who's hearing it for the first time. Claire stopped walking and turned to face the older woman. You know you're family to us, right? Not just a friend, family. Dorothy's eyes glistened. She pulled Claire into a hug that was fierce and brief and said everything that words could not. I know, child, she whispered. I've known since the day that little girl looked up at me with tears in her eyes and asked me to help a stranger. That evening, they all sat around the cabin table for Dorothy's last dinner. Ryder had cooked a skill he had been developing with quiet determination, and while the pasta was slightly overcooked and the garlic bread was slightly burned, nobody cared. Lily told Dorothy about every friend she had made at school, every trail she had explored, every bird she had identified from the field guide Claire had given her. Dorothy listened to all of it with the focused attention of someone who understood that these small stories were the real fabric of a life. When it was time for bed, Lily hugged Dorothy so tightly that the older woman had to gently pry herself free. I'll be back for Christmas, Dorothy promised, with even more pies. And cookies, Lily negotiated. And cookies. Lily went to bed satisfied, and the adults sat on the porch one last time wrapped in blankets against the November chill. The stars were out in force, and somewhere down in the valley, a coyote called into the darkness, its voice high and lonesome and beautiful. Thank you, Dorothy, Ryder said, for everything, for taking me in when you had every reason not to, for keeping Lily safe, for being the person who held everything together when the rest of us were falling apart. Dorothy reached over and took his hand, her weathered fingers warm against his calloused ones. You would have done the same for me, she said simply. I'm not sure about that. I am. She squeezed his hand once and let go. That's the difference between us. I'm always sure. The next morning, they watched Dorothy's car disappear down the dirt road, Lily waving from the porch until the dust settled and the road was empty again. She'll be back, Claire said, putting her arm around Lily's shoulders. I know, Lily said. Then after a moment again, Mommy is Miss Dorothy, our grandmother. Claire considered this. She's something better than that, she said. She's the person who chose to love us. And that's the strongest kind of family there is. Ryder stood behind them in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his eyes following the road where Dorothy's car had been. He did not say anything, but the expression on his face, soft and full and grateful, said everything that mattered. Winter came to Millhaven with a gentleness that surprised Claire. She had expected harshness, mountain cold, that would test their resolve and make them question their decision. Instead, the winter was beautiful. Snow fell softly on the pines, turning the valley into a landscape so pristine it looked painted. The cabin was warm, the wood stove radiating heat that filled every room, and on the coldest nights the three of them would pile onto the couch with blankets and hot chocolate and watch the fire dance behind the grate. Ryder taught Lily to build a snowman. They spent an entire Saturday afternoon in the meadow behind the cabin, rolling balls of snow until they were taller than Lily, then stacking them and decorating them with stones and sticks and an old scarf Dorothy had sent in a care package. Claire watched from the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the drink. On Christmas morning, Lily came downstairs to find a small wooden rocking horse beside the tree. Ryder had carved it himself, working in the garage after hours sanding the wood smooth and painting it a deep chestnut brown. It was not fancy, it was not expensive. But the craftsmanship was evident in every curve and joint, and the love that had gone into making it was something no store could sell. Lily sat on it immediately and rocked back and forth, her face alight with joy, while Ryder stood nearby with his hands in his pockets and his eyes suspiciously bright. It's the best present ever, Lily declared, and Claire, watching from the kitchen doorway, believed her. Spring came to Millhaven like a slow, deep breath. The snow melted from the ridges. The creek behind the cabin swelled with clear, cold water. Wildflowers appeared in the meadow, painting the grass in blues and yellows and delicate pinks. Lily turned 6 on a warm April morning. Ryder had spent weeks building her a treehouse in the massive oak behind the cabin. Not just any treehouse, a treehouse with windows and a rope ladder and a small covered deck where she could sit and read and watch the birds that nested in the branches around her. It's a castle, Lily breathed when she saw it. A castle in the sky. Every princess needs one, Ryder said. He was grinning, a full, unguarded grin that Claire wished she could photograph and keep forever. The birthday party was small. Lily's school friends came along with Marcus, who had become her best friend. Dorothy drove up for the occasion, arriving with a cake she had baked herself and a new teddy bear to keep the old one company. They ate cake in the meadow and played tag among the wildflowers and watched the sun set from Lily's treehouse deck, a dozen children and 3 adults crammed into a space meant for 2, all of them laughing. That night, after the guests had gone and Lily was asleep with cake crumbs still on her cheek, Claire and Ryder sat on the porch swing he had built. The spring air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of the creek. I want to tell you something, Claire said. Ryder looked at her. In the moonlight, her face was soft, relaxed in a way he had not seen when they first reunited. The tension that had lived in her jaw, the wariness behind her eyes, the careful way she had held herself, all of it was gone, replaced by something open and calm and whole. I'm happy, she said. I just wanted you to know that. I'm actually genuinely happy. Ryder was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased and worn from being carried too long. It was Lily's crayon drawing, the one she had given him the day he left, with 3 stick figures holding hands. Mommy, Daddy, me. She drew this, he said, before she even knew I'd stay. She saw what we could be before any of us believed it was possible. Claire took the drawing and held it carefully, touching the wobbly letters with her fingertip. She's always been braver than us, Claire said. Smarter, too. They sat together on the porch swing, the drawing between them, listening to the mountain night. An owl called somewhere in the pines. The creek murmured its constant, steady song. The stars overhead were so thick and bright, they looked like someone had spilled a bucket of light across the sky. Ryder, yeah, thank you for staying. He put his arm around her and pulled her close. She leaned into his warmth, solid and real. And finally, after everything here, thank you for finding me, he said. The summer returned to Millhaven, and with it came the anniversary of the day Lily had found Ryder in that dumpster. None of them marked it on a calendar or talked about it in advance. But on that particular morning, Claire woke early and found Ryder already sitting on the porch. His coffee untouched, his gaze resting on the mountains as they slowly emerged from the morning mist. She sat beside him without speaking. The birds were starting their dawn chorus, filling the valley with a layered symphony of calls and responses that grew louder as the light strengthened. 1 year, Ryder said finally. Hard to believe. A lot has changed. Everything has changed. He picked up his coffee and held it without drinking. A year ago, I didn't know my own name half the time. Didn't know where I was going or where I'd been. Didn't know I had a daughter. His voice caught slightly on the word. Now I wake up every morning and the first thing I hear is her feet hitting the floor, and I think this is what it's all about. This is what everything was for. Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. The flannel was warm from the early sun, and she could feel his heartbeat through the fabric, steady and slow and certain. Do you still have the nightmares? She asked. Ryder was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, less than before. They used to come every night, the warehouse, Hawk's face, the sound of the motorcycle hitting the guardrail. He took a slow breath. Now it's maybe once a week, and when I wake up, I hear Lily breathing in the next room, and it brings me back. Back to where? Back to here. Back to real. They sat together until Lily appeared in the doorway, her hair wild from sleep, her teddy bear trailing from one hand. She looked at her parents on the porch swing and smiled, the kind of smile that starts in the eyes and spreads outward until it fills the whole face. Can we make pancakes? She asked. Blueberry or chocolate chip? Ryder asked. Both. Both it is. Lily climbed onto the swing, between them still warm from sleep, and the three of them sat there for a few more minutes, watching the mist lift from the valley and the mountains sharpen against the brightening sky. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The morning held them in its gentle palm, and they let it. Later that week, Claire received a call from Dorothy. The older woman's voice was different, lighter than usual, tinged with an excitement that was unusual for someone who prided herself on unshakable calm. I'm retiring, Dorothy announced, from the Hargrove mansion, from everything, 43 years of cleaning other people's houses, and I'm finally hanging up my apron. Claire felt a grin spreading across her face. Dorothy, that's wonderful. What are you going to do? Well, Dorothy said, and then there was a pause that was too carefully timed to be anything but deliberate. I was thinking about what you said, about family, about choosing to love people, and I was wondering if there might be room in that little mountain town of yours for one more. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Are you serious? As a heart attack, which at my age is not just an expression. Dorothy's voice softened. I've been alone a long time, Claire. Long enough to know that being alone is not the same as being at peace. I'd like to be closer to my family. If they'll have me. Claire could barely speak through the lump in her throat. There's a cottage for sale 2 streets from the diner. It has a garden. How big a garden? Big enough for everything you could ever want to grow. Then I suppose I'm moving to Millhaven. When Claire told Lily that evening, the little girl's reaction was so loud that Ryder came running from the garage, wrench in hand, convinced something was wrong. He found Lily jumping on the couch and Claire laughing and crying at the same time. Miss Dorothy is coming to live here, Lily shouted. Forever and ever. Ryder set the wrench down on the kitchen table and leaned against the door frame, watching the two of them celebrate. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. Well, he said, I guess I better start fixing up that cottage. Dorothy moved to Millhaven on a warm June day, her old station wagon loaded with boxes and a back seat full of pie tins. Ryder had spent 3 weeks renovating the cottage, replacing the porch boards, painting the shutters, and building raised garden beds in the backyard. He had also, without being asked, installed a ramp alongside the front steps, anticipating the day when Dorothy's knees would no longer tolerate stairs. Dorothy noticed the ramp immediately. She stood at the end of the walkway, hands on her hips, and studied it with the critical eye of a woman who had spent her life maintaining other people's properties. That's good work, she said. Don't sound so surprised, Ryder replied. I'm not surprised. I'm impressed. There's a difference. Lily led Dorothy through every room of the cottage, pointing out features as though she were a real estate agent. This is where your cooking stuff goes. And this is where you can sit and read. And this is the garden. See, Daddy built those boxes for you. Dorothy stood in the garden and looked out at the mountains rising above the town. The air smelled like pine and wildflowers, and the distant sweetness of honeysuckle growing along the fence. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, and when she opened them, there were tears on her cheeks. It's perfect, she whispered. Lily took her hand. Welcome home, Grandma Dorothy. Nobody corrected her. The title fit. The town of Millhaven embraced Dorothy the way it had embraced all of them, with a quiet acceptance that did not require explanations or justifications. She joined the local garden club within the first week and was elected treasurer within the first month. She volunteered at the school alongside Ryder, helping in the cafeteria and reading to the younger children during library hour. She brought pies to every community event and casseroles to every family in need. And within 6 months, people in Millhaven spoke of Dorothy Blaine as though she had been there forever. The four of them settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as the seasons. Sunday dinners at Dorothy's cottage became tradition, with Ryder grilling in the backyard while Lily set the table, and Claire and Dorothy worked in the kitchen, their laughter carrying through the open windows and into the evening air. They celebrated holidays together, mourned small losses together, and navigated the everyday challenges of life in a small mountain town, with a grace that came from knowing they had already survived much worse. Ryder's memory continued to heal slowly and unevenly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. Some pieces came back sharp and clear. Others remained blurred, half-formed, forever incomplete. He learned to make peace with the gaps, to accept that the man he had been before the accident and the man he was now were connected but not identical, and that the latter was someone worth being. He never returned to the Iron Wolves, never sought out the remaining members, never tried to fill in the darkest parts of his history. Those chapters were closed, sealed behind a door he had no desire to open. What mattered was the chapter he was writing now with Claire and Lily and Dorothy in the small cabin at the end of the dirt road, surrounded by mountains and bird song and the steady beating heart of a life finally being lived. One evening in late summer, as the sun painted the valley in shades of amber and gold, Lily came running up the dirt road from the bus stop, her backpack bouncing, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy," she called, "I got picked to be the narrator in the school play." Ryder was on the porch replacing a loose board on the railing. He set down his hammer and caught Lily as she launched herself at him, swinging her into his arms with a strength that belied the old wound in his side. "The narrator," he said, "that's the most important part. I know I have to learn all the words. Will you help me practice? Every night until opening night. Promise, promise." Claire appeared in the doorway, her laptop under her arm, her face soft with the particular kind of happiness that comes from watching the people you love be good to each other. "I heard someone got a big role," she said. Lily squirmed out of Ryder's arms and ran to her mother, already reciting the first lines she had memorized. Claire knelt down and listened with the same focused attention she gave to her most important clients, because this was more important than any client would ever be. That evening, after dinner and homework, and the bedtime rituals that had become sacred in their household, Claire and Ryder stood in the doorway of Lily's room and watched her sleep. She lay on her side, her breathing soft, and even her teddy bears lined up on the shelf Ryder had built her collection of feathers and stones and pressed wildflowers arranged with the careful precision of someone who treasured every small wonder the world had offered her. "We did okay," Claire whispered. Ryder put his arm around her. "We did better than okay." They stood there for a long time, watching their daughter dream, listening to the mountain night settle around the cabin like a blanket. The creek sang its quiet song. The pines whispered in the breeze. And in the cottage, 2 streets from the diner, Dorothy Blaine sat in her garden, watching the same stars that hung above the cabin, connected to the family she had helped create by bonds that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. In the cabin behind them, Lily slept soundly in her room beneath the painted shelf with the flowers and butterflies, her old teddy bear under one arm and her new one under the other. On her nightstand, beside a collection of feathers and stones and pressed wildflowers, sat a photograph of 4 people on a porch at sunset, squinting into the light. all of them smiling. On the back, in neat handwriting, it read, "Family is not always the people you are born to. Sometimes it is the people who find you." Outside, the mountains held the valley in their dark, steady arms, and the night was quiet and the world was still, and three hearts beat together in the small cabin at the end of the dirt road. No longer searching, no longer running, no longer afraid. They were home.